Anishinaabe miniko sema, chiranonan. Manito, hatsukana gaye, wapanong, shawanong ningabi anong, kiwetinong. Kimama nan gaye miigwech, nindina. Miigwech gaye, nindinag. Kagipimatasyo at meusha. Wito kawishinam, minik kenipimatasiyang.
This story is Ojibwemowin, or the Ojibwe language. Binesikwe, Nindijinikaz, Makwa, Indo Dam. Winona LaDuke from the White Earth Reservation. The ability to make sounds is a sacred gift from Gichimanadu, or the Great Spirit. It is the essence of identity for all living things. Sounds are used to communicate with each other and the spirit world. The Creator has given the Anishinaabe-Ojibwe a gift, the sounds of our sacred language, Anishinaabe-Mowin.
Sema nitam manin kowe Anishinaabe abaji adina sema misa jugo bina kuna danoan manidun wa manidu shpemiyat shumi sina make itakiminan genin idu kumisinan da nishuina misa imani binda kuna gase.
Our language is a gift. It was a gift given to the Anishinaabe by the Creator. It defines us. They talked about it not as language as we talk about it in English, but as our sound. And I thought that was a wonderful way to do it. When you hear Ojibwe, you can hear how the sound is different, of course, from English, and the way it defines us as a people.
When an infant was in a cradle board, listened to the birds, to the insects, to the animals, to the winds, learning about the world through sound. The child listens, and after anywhere between 4,000 and 6,000 hours of listening, the child utters a word.
Our words are songs. Our words are prayers. Everything that comes out of our mouth is a prayer because the Great Spirit's listening to us all the time. So we're singing to the heart, to our heartbeat when we talk.
Stories about our creation have been passed down for centuries in Ojibwemowin.
I think in the beginning of time, when people were created, every group of people has a creation story. In every creation story, there's a philosophy, there's a belief that you're indoctrinated into believing. And I think the Ojibwe philosophy is so simple because it tells you of your circle, of your beginning, your origin. The creation story starts with the little muskrat diving down, bringing this little piece of dirt up. It's like us going deep down into ourselves to bring this knowledge out.
Kakena gi kizi yabawe aki. Beji kedashawe eneni wena buju jina kazo manitugo awe. Anishinaabe ego gi inenda gozo gi je toi gaye. Wena buju gichime tegon gi eje agwa ta. Nibiogo awe siyag ki pi agwa ta wag gayega oningwe wad. Going ganage in gochi de binago sunun ake. Midash ga inendan wena bujo we kugid. We anda waban gang ake. Minawa we ojetud oski ake. Gabe isa gi ondende. Gi nisabawa ogi inenemigo awe siyag. Misa gapi eje obash ka sekad. Gawin gego aki ogi gashketosin unzang temi. Be bejik awe siyag ogi gujitunawa. Gega dashego nisabawewag gujituwad. Kagwe bituwad ake. Midash awe bejik wajashk ogi gujitun. Ogi anwenemigo anindigo ogi bapi ego. Apajigo gabe gi odende. Midash ga pi ije abush kan zikad mebo. Midash oma wawan ninjins. Wena buju ga eji mekang bangi takunamened ake. Midash ema mikenak o pikwananing. Ga eji atud ake wena buju. Midash mi kanak. Ga eje nimenang niwing ogi buta dan. Midash ima ga ane onji oji ayag awe ake. Nongum mekanako menes ga ejinakateg. Wena buju ga eje nagamod. Drakena awe siyag nimiwag. Migwetche wenda moad owe oshki ake. Owe onji manetu gagi minenang. Gagi kwe gagi gduwin.
It is through the language and only through the language that we can get this brief glimpse of our history. The elders, the teachers, the wisdom keepers of our nation, the Anishinaabe, the Ojibwe nation, have maintained that all creation stories are true. All creation stories are true.
The oral tradition is very important for passing down our history.
When we talk about history, traditional history, we don't concern ourselves dates or personalities, but teachings. It's something that'll help us to remember what they felt was important, like life.
In order to tell a story exactly the way you heard it, that is an art. And that art of oratory is what the Indian people and Anishinaabe people had long ago.
We did have the sacred scrolls, the birch bark scrolls, and a very sophisticated form of pictograph writing. And so there was a very strong oral tradition that was based on the scrolls.
The language is part of us. It's our culture, it's our environment. It goes with us wherever we go. Where did we come from? How did we get here? Who am I? You know, who am I? You need to know who you are.
Well, Anishinaabe now is just Indian. Ojibwe is referring to the tribe, you know, the Chippewa. Chippewa is more an English misnomer from the word Ojibwe. Morberg was the first one that ever wrote anything as far as Indian was, and he wrote O-T-C-H-I-P-W-E for Chippewa, for Ojibwe, and it came out like Chippewa. And Chippewa is just the English version of Ojibwe. That's our tribe.
In our ceremonies, we're told, even today, that we came from the east. Our migration story is told frequently. And when we understand Ojibwe, we know what's being said. We're told the creation stories frequently also in our ceremony. In the migration from the east to the Great Lakes was, I suspect, the last great period of time when the Ojibwe people were whole and when the language was spoken.
But a time came then that the people then began to sense something coming. And so there came to the people 7 spirits. And they delivered to the people 7 major prophecies that are still being unfolded and revealed today. It was foretold that there will come across the great salt water in boats. And they said those boats will be carrying a light-skinned race of people. That the light-skinned race of people will bring many things. They'll bring many good things, they'll bring many, many bad things.
The French arrived in the Great Lakes region seeking the valuable furs and trading with the Ojibwe they encountered.
It brought great changes to the Ojibwe people in terms of technology available that they had not previously had, like steel, iron and steel, weapons, guns, rifles, gunpowder, shot. Those kind of things that kind of eased their lives, steel traps for trapping. But it also changed their lives drastically because it now became an economy based on trade of what they had available to trade.
Ojibwemowin became the language of the fur trade for the Europeans and other tribes, such as the Menominee, Winnebago or Ho-Chunk, and Huron.
The contact that occurred had to have occurred based on indigenous language or Anishinaabe-Ojibwe.
This way.
Because they were the language of power at the time. And so in order for the new people to exist, they had to have a way to communicate. And they had to be able to learn Anishinaabe-Ojibwe. And a lot of times that's recorded in their own documents that they were speakers.
Ultimately, the Europeans started using their teaching systems, their teaching styles. They did write Ojibwe dictionaries. In Ojibwe dictionary, they began to introduce their religions, along with the religions, their rites and rituals that went with those. They wrote their books in Ojibwe, their hymnals, those kind of books, religious books in Ojibwe language.
As the British and later the Americans gained power over the region, English became the dominant language for commerce.
Within the language embodies the culture, the history, the feelings, the communication, how they relate to one another, the history, the ceremonies, everything is tied to the culture. And one of the things that they wanted to do is, again, the government continuously wanted more land, and they had to really dispossess Indian people of that land.
A lot of times there's a misinformation that is given to us when we're going to school, like in history classes, that we were conquered militarily. That is not true. You know, the United States government, which is considered to be a powerful nation, at one time tried to do that. But because of the enormous cost of their own lives and economics, that they had to try and find different ways. And one of the ways they came up with is treaties.
The expanding American government sought land from the Ojibwe and negotiated in the English language through paid translators.
Kain we wene git bottom silk care. Guys under the mark going the object to go get the keeman on my habitamon. Go obscure when the tummy bizarre. And also get to the hour no Anishinaabe ni wikagi na mutuawan ge. Minoas go on a kanutamagi and Noagi, Chitaba Moawag. To school where any of is a mawad with Anishinaabe-Ojibwe.
In our negotiations with them, the treaties are in English, our language, not their language. We held the power when we negotiated those treaties in the sense that the treaty negotiators, the interpreters for those treaties were on the federal payroll, the United States payroll. We recorded those treaties in our language, and much of what was said at the treaty negotiations was not actually in the treaties themselves, but was in the proceedings that led up to the treaties.
Using this process, the Americans gained millions of acres of land. The Ojibwe received very little. As settlement continued in the Great Lakes region, the United States government stepped up its assault on Ojibwe people with the passage of the Civilization Fund Act of 1819.
Language always represented the people, you know, and so one of the ways that they wanted to blend them in is that, and they saw that as one of the main obstacles of civilization, of civilizing the Indian people, and so you had to get rid of the culture and the language, and so that was targeted right off the bat.
In 1887, the government directive came down through the education system.
Your attention is called to the regulation of this office, which forbids instruction in schools in any Indian language. The education of Indians in the vernacular is not only of no use to them, but is detrimental to their education and civilization.
The purpose of the boarding schools was to assimilate Indian children, and the assimilation process would eliminate the Indian problem in this country. Indians would not exist anymore.
Our language was targeted for extermination through the government and mission boarding schools. Ojibwe children were punished severely for using their language.
Many children didn't speak English at all when they got to boarding school, but English was the only language that was allowed.
Mishmino mamin gangin tajaga nashi musimin hetagi Ojibwemowin. Mishu nugi bizat gabang mi yeshko wabo mangedwangyo aname kona ekwig eshe oad gimakadewa ne wan obisikaga ne wan. Kanman viasi mingi kusana ne gyo aname kona ekwig. Mishu gangen gini siratawasu ananig nitamyo kaki kenda man. Speak English, speak English. Ashna geshtiangangi kanazimin English. Ingi papakiteo gumin.
Children were disciplined very strongly with a strap at one school that I have heard about. Some schools had, if you can believe it, cells or dungeons where a child would be locked for like solitary confinement, removal from your peers, and then kept there for a while to think about what they had done.
Well, some of the kids that were sent there, from kindergarten on, they stayed there until they finished that school. So they stayed there year round. They lost everything. One of the fortunate ones that was fortunate enough to come home every summer. My grandmother, she couldn't speak any English. We tried to talk the English language like we learned at school. And that lady would say, "Gawin, bigi chumukumanu isin, chi inuyan ni inuyan. Chumukumanu ngugi minaw guinawajina, kitaya gayegi ni ge inuyan, mi inuyan."
Speaking your language, I guess the people running the school, the people who were disciplining the children, didn't think of it as just speaking your language. I suppose they thought of it as just rebellion, and perhaps it was.
A lot of the children were beaten or speaking their language in these boarding schools, and I think that when they came back home, they remembered those teachings very well, and they didn't want their children beaten. So they tended not to teach them the traditional language if they didn't know it. They kept them away from those kinds of things because they didn't want to, all Ojibwe people just love their children, okay? And they just don't want to see them hurt.
Perhaps if some of our elders did not pass the language or maybe some of the ways on to us, I think that they took a good look at what their own experience had been. And we respect our elders for the wisdom that they have gained through their experience. And I would never question why an elder did not try to teach us to speak our own language or to speak it to us much so that we could learn it naturally. There was such heartbreak associated with school and education and with what had happened to them as they were getting this Indianness kind of bled out of them, that, you know, all I can do is just feel the compassion that I have for all that they did for us in keeping, you know, what they did.
Besides the prohibition of our language and the boarding school indoctrination of our children, the government passed measures such as the laws for Indian courts, which outlawed many aspects of our traditional culture and spiritual practices. The Anishinaabe language and our spiritual ways went underground.
I knew one old elderly. He tell legends, and he started talking about Waasa-Inaabidaa. What Waasa-Inaabidaa did to begin with. Why he kept it going, everything that he done.
For over 100 years, Ojibwe men and women could be jailed for speaking their language and conducting ceremonies. Several generations passed with families speaking mostly English. Anishinaabe communities have lost many of their fluent speakers. On the Bauman continuum of language viability, Anishinaabe-Mowin is listed as an endangered indigenous language. It is important to reflect on the past and to decide what to leave behind and what to renew.
And it took many, many years. Many years that we have forgotten the ways that, especially our language, that we left behind. And it's going to take time again if we're ever going to rebuild, you know, our Anishinaabe-Ojibwe or Anishinaabe-Mowin. It's going to take that much time.
When we lose our language, we lose our culture, we lose our traditions, we lose our ceremonies. How can we conduct our ceremonies to the Great Spirit in another language?
Anishinaabe ne juito kago de ego uge mandu chigero chum Anishinaabe mima chinjisiru tange bane o we gune ne ndashinag mo Anishinaabe miso wenjigicha pi tenda waka o chinjisiru tago da uyaga kanunado Anishinaabe anandu motige no ago de baji mutogone me soendango sinisiro tago da we ganunat uge ejitwats.
The Great Spirit gave us a language, they gave us a tradition, they gave us a culture. And if we talk to him in English, of course they know the Lord knows everything. You wonder, I wonder if he's going to keep that language, or if he's going to turn over from Anishinaabe to the non-Anishinaabe. Because eventually, if they don't, one of these days a person is going to come to you and say, what are you, nationality? He says, no. I'm descended from people that call themselves Anishinaabe or Indian people. I am a descendant of one of those. That's what those people are going to say eventually. And we're trying to keep them from saying that.
Language is the cornerstone to consider yourself a political entity. According to international law, you have to have a language in order for you to consider yourself sovereign. When we do not utilize language in our affairs, in our own independent political affairs, then we have no right to say that we're sovereign.
It's our responsibility to take care of these things, the things that we were given for the well-being of our people, of our babies, of our children, and our families, our parents and aunts and uncles and elders. And that has been forgotten. It's been forgotten, but we're coming back. You know, people say we're on a resurgence. And I believe that. I can see that people right now, we're being faced with this situation where if we don't do anything soon, you look at the past trends of how many elders and fluent speakers and carriers of our traditional knowledge we have lost. If we don't do anything now, it will be gone, and we'll be left with maybe this video being left on a shelf somewhere or on a CD-ROM.
It's sort of like a conversion factor, taking ourselves back to believe, to value our language, our identity, and what it can do for us in terms of perpetuating life.
Anishinaabe-Mowin reflects our unique way of seeing and understanding the world. It embodies a philosophy that perpetuates life.
Our language is based on orality, relationships, then each's definition is valued because each's definition is based on experience. And so when you create a dictionary, then that becomes the predominant dictator in how you're going to understand words. It's not based on experience. All the things that we believe philosophically is based on experience. Life is so important for Anishinaabe that each person's definition of their a word, as they understand it, is viable and it's acceptable.
Language can be broken up into very simply two categories: objects that are animate, objects that are inanimate. Gishpen Ojibwemowin Nij Kadiabajatun Ye Gishpen Gego Kama Gajibiton Gishpen Abidin Gidaket Kashkama Bitun Ye Magijage Gidaket Bij Ye Gishpen Abid Gishpen Ojibwemowin De Wegan Gayati Ute Gidaket Bij De Wegan Gawin Gidaket Bitun De Wegan Oweak Shawegan Amat the bit all De Wegan Minawa Migo Bejigon Ye Niguan Minawa Opwagan Minawa Sema Get to go get that Gishpen Giabajatun Anishinaabe-Mowin. I always tell my students, you know, I have a pipe, so the terminology is important here. And do I call myself a pipe owner? Do I own a pipe? I don't say that. I cannot declare that. That's like saying, since a pipe is animate, it is a person or a thing. I do not own another person. It's like, it would be the same thing as saying, I own a wife. And we don't say that, you know. We can't own another person. So the correct terminology for a person that carries a pipe is a pipe carrier. So very simply, animate and inanimate objects in Ojibwemowin can explain a lot.
Anishinaabe-Mowin indicates that life is the single most valued thing, whereas in Western language, it's things. William Leap, a linguist out of American University, did a major research I believe in the 80s, and he found that English language is predominantly made up of nouns, and the percentage used was 60% nouns, and Anishinaabe-Ojibwe is 80% verbs. So there you can see, the different philosophies, and you can extract deep philosophies just knowing those two things. And that's why I'm saying, the Western mind, and I know, because I see it. You all see it. We're all affected by that because we speak the Western language, and so our values are shaped by that. We begin to acquire houses, and we begin to subdivide our lots, and we try to acquire cars or what have you. Different people have different levels of value to that aspirations. But Anishinaabe-Ojibwe, it's a language of process. It's a language of relationship. It's always moving. You can never stop it to say that's it, And so you can never corner it, and that's the beauty of Anishinaabe-Ojibwe.
The language is alive. The language, it lives connected to, I think, the traditional environment of Anishinaabe, out there at the rice beds. It lives in our ceremonies. It lives at the storytellings when we would sit around for hours, and maybe that storyteller would just keep going, and the little kids would fall asleep, and they would just keep going and going and going, and people would be listening. So it's important, I think, that we always think of it in terms of that, in terms of its spirituality, because Anishinaabe is a spiritual person. We're spiritual beings, so the language is there for us. That's our vehicle to communicate with Manidug, with Kijay Manidu, and to ask for help, to honor, to give thanks for healing, for all of these things, all the spiritual nature of everything, of who we are and what is in our environment.
Concepts of time is, again, very unique. It is really, we do really have this concept of Indian time, and it's all based on a spatio-temporal process, where, like the sun, we know, somehow we knew for a long, long time that the sun is not real where you seem to see it, because I think the Western people have discovered like it's eight minutes away from where it was. So that's why, we said that the sun was like a being that was always moving. It wasn't a thing where you can say, well, it's there. We already knew somehow, supernaturally, that it wasn't there. It just appeared to be there, but it was 8 minutes that way. And so that's why it's a process. We can never be arrogant and say it's there.
Our language is, in structure, is made up of prefixes. Then there are your core or your root words. Then there are the suffixes. For example, the word to run to, is patto. There are at least 150 prefixes can be affixed to that core word, and so that there are 150 different ways of running. Then there's another word for running from.
So when Western people say, like Anishinaabe don't understand concepts of abstraction, that's also a lie. We can debunk that if we had time to debunk it, because you simply look at some of the geometric designs of traditional embroidery, the beading concepts. So that tells us they knew something about the geometric or abstractions. And that's why we ourselves, when we begin to lose our language, these things become meaningless. We become nothing more than brown-skinned Western people. Thought-wise, we're not different. Skin-wise, maybe we're visible, and of course, that is a barrier unto itself. And so we have to maintain who we are, who our mothers and fathers wanted us to be. So we have to honor that. And that's honoring your mother is speaking Anishinaabe-Ojibwe, because that's who we are. And we're also bilingual, because the relationships we have with Western world, that's our reality. So we have to be bilingual, we have to be bicultural, we have to exist both worlds. But it doesn't mean we have to lose our predominant existence. So that's another example of the beauty of Anishinaabe-Ojibwe.
As a result of the Civil Rights Movement and other events in the 60s, the Freedom of Religion Act passed, which made it legal for Native Americans to practice their spiritual beliefs and speak their language openly. As well, the Indian Education Act and American Indian Self-Determination Act were passed in the 70s, which finally placed decision-making about our children's education back in the hands of parents. Tribal schools sprang up emphasizing language and culture. Despite more than 200 years of oppression, today Anishinaabe-Mowin is being taught in both public and tribal schools. It is a difficult process to learn a language if you have only spoken and heard English.
These three things are called Ojibwe protocol. My father was the one that kind of coined it. He said, number one, you should know your Indian name. 2, you should know your clan. 3, you should know where you're from. So those very three things, Ojibwe protocol, is what I encourage my students to talk about.
A lot of the elders now are keeping the language going by going into the schools when they start assisting new teachers, and also by being there.
Gawin wika me wisha amanch da subibu ni neta ngi ke kino mage kino madi ugamigum da Ojibwemowin nungum shwingo na waj bata nino wag kanabach ne niwi wag ngi ke kino mage je nungum mama na gi anuna wag gaye ngi uchi Anishinaabe mage kino madi ugamigum da ayawa da bezindagwad sago ne abinujian anuj gegu and dishige min ajimin wenda goziwad sago da gikino da gikinda muwadi udin wewiniwan mazini chiga na genda baji a nanig na go gikinua mawawa gigaye jinitana gamuwad da abaji tuwad sago udin wewiniwa Kegi iskiga mizigewad, miguma agwajing inda ji iskiga mizigewad, agwajing ma bada jitawad ge abinujiag, migu ejigi kenda muad, ganawabi wad geigu gikenda muad, gikina wabi wad sago, ishka mishigo pane nunda muad indi nenda min ninawand, apane nunda wawad ni Ojibwemowin nijin migu ge gapi ge wina wa ge Ojibwemowin.
Angabe kinan digo anenendama kinan digo buchitota neshke kinege gugi pakanse ye pematisin enatiset ke pakangetinatisin.
Ojibwe language programs continue to expand in area schools.
I think teaching Ojibwe has to be holistic. You have to use as many different experiences as possible and enrich a student's learning with real life experiences, something practical, something that they're going to be able to use. So to provide opportunity for students to have firsthand experience in that. So when people ask me, they say, what can I do with Ojibwe language? I would say, well, what can't you do with Ojibwe language? That's the challenge.
Most of the situations I see is that students come to my classroom and say, you know, my mother never, or father never taught me the language, and so I don't know it, and they feel ashamed about that. Well, they can choose to wallow in that and stay where they are, or they can choose to say, look, this is what the situation is, this is what's happened, and my parents never taught me the language, and it's part of being an Anishinaabe, They could choose to stay that and say, poor me, or they could choose to do something about it.
Gikoi usensu an gawin opportunity ginunda zinu yu Anishinaabe-Ojibwe. Mi tago ginano bebunga maji gikino omago yan jinita Anishinaabe-Ojibwe. Idash gawin nungum geabe gawin opportunity ta Anishinaabe-Ojibwe nungum. Sanagad da abajatu yan yu Anishinaabe-Ojibwe enda sugije kitash enda sugije nimbinda kuna ginkiu monitug Dewi kawiwad jinita Anishinaabe-Ojibwe yan kitashigo gitazima gawin nita Anishinaabe-Ojibwe wag gitazima nisay nimse gawin nita Anishinaabe-Ojibwe nine tago sanagad apjigo sanagad miwenje paba ayan mizwe mujagigo paba ayan Anishinaabe waking je bizindawa gwa ingunita Anishinaabe-Ojibwe nimigweche wendem mag ingu gekino omajig bebame benest tob sana kot kinyo Indini wag bindi moye yag akiwenzi okay. Pochigo Jimmy Kwende magwa ingiu gekino omage jig Anishinaabe-Ojibwe Anishinaabe je twawan gaye. Idash nongum nindano kio ma sugo dawa zaga iganinga big kinda su igamigung oma sugo shkoniganing. Minua ninga gwejitun ji implemente tu yani u language preservation plan ijine kade yu oma language preservation restoration igaye intergenerational abinuji ensak Anishinaabe ensak minua nini wag ikwe wag kichi aya ak kakina sugo Anishinaabe goma Jiwi duko dadi ang jibi mate ziwe nagako Anishinaabe-Ojibwe jiwan tusi wangu Anishinaabe-Ojibwe kaya.
Gako medaso bibo nagak ingojigo gawin ngin nita Anishinaabe-Ojibwe yopi ngigi kendanan nije kedoana yopi buju mino amigo migo miniki kendaman yopi nongam dash ijinge shinan jinne baya na nir nago shik impawajige Anishinaabe-Ojibwe mina wago eji na naga de wendaman gai nakamigak gegetago inge kenda no o mina wa wenji kanoda no o gawin niwi dajime disasin mi etago jiwinda monago ke jiwinda mawagwa niji Anishinaabe menanik gishpen gashke toya ninje ejitchige yan bushke uya wagashke toje ejitchige gewin gegetago da enakamegat itash yo niwi dajindan ga gekinu mawi wadin giu getchi ya ak no ajay pitis ijig kenda mawadi Ojibwemowin Anishinaabe no maya Anishinaabe go owanenda nawa jaba jiawa do the same aniwa gegetago api tendago Anishinaabe jaba jiawa do the same aniwa gegetago indajitchige min appane
Anishinaabe support each other in promoting language preservation and share successful strategies in regional language conferences. Anishinaabe-Mowin in Sault Ste. Marie strategically brings together Canadian and U.S. Anishinaabe to share methods, conduct workshops, network, and renew their commitment to the re-establishment of Ojibwemowin as their first language. Also, Anishinaabe-Ojibwe is an innovative annual gathering of tribal members committed to maintaining the language and promoting its growth throughout the region.
The Ojibwe Language Society is made up of students at the University of Minnesota. We provide a community service. The first thing that happens is the first 10-15 minutes people arrive with food. It's a potluck. And we tease and joke that our motto is we'll teach for food. And but it's also a traditional thing to do that. Sometimes we get visiting elders and we ask them to do the opening prayer. We have a standard speech that everybody uses all the way around the table. They talk about everything that's personal in their life. And as they come back every week, they add to the speech and their proficiency develops. After that, we break up into little groups, and there's a lot more one-on-one, and we do little mini lessons, 7 to 10-minute lessons, and there's about 4 language teachers that show up pretty regular at the language table. Now they have places in Onigum on Leech Lake, in La Courte and Fond du Lac, and now here they're going to be starting up in Canada also. We run language camps. In the summertime, we do language retreats.
Immersion camps are available in the summer throughout the Great Lakes region in Canada. Students spend either whole or half days listening and speaking only Anishinaabe-Ojibwe. More and more students are experiencing success in learning the language.
Well, what I've found is that singing in Ojibwe actually awakens something in the kids. The Ojibwe language is very musical. It's based in music. For example, the word Waasa-Inaabidaa, the word for chicken, I mean that's music that comes from the chicken. We have speakers who come up with lyrics for the songs, and I actually find a rhythm, and then I take it to the keyboard and come up with a melody that matches the words. So it's not very hard for me to come up with a tune that goes with the words. We only expect maybe, a certain percentage to be near proficient. But if we accomplish that, then that'll be enough to carry it on to the next generation.
The Anishinaabe Journal is a publication which is one of a kind in that it's an exclusively Ojibwe language focused publication and has the purpose of preserving language and also the purpose of teaching, sharing stories, and so forth. I asked somebody about Ojibwe language and learning strategies, and they suggested I get involved in transcribing. So I brought along a tape recorder, started recording. And I was amazed as I got into the transcription process how much that involved listening, not writing, but listening. You have to back it up and listen to a sentence maybe 10 times to be able to get it down on paper correctly, word for word. So I think it's a really good teaching tool. It's a great preservation tool. And judging by the comments of speakers who've had stories in there, it's very well appreciated by the speakers and certainly their families.
A unique set of comic books that emphasize Ojibwe language and culture have been developed by the Mille Lacs Band of Ojibwe. This approach appeals to young people while providing important education.
I've always wanted to do a comic book and kind of give them a history of their tribe and get them to think about what is being lost or what was taken away. And there's a lot of great response from the students in different schools. It's always good to see to have the students react in a positive manner.
Two-way instructional television systems provide Anishinaabe-Ojibwe to schools that have no teachers. Distance learning technology is becoming common for language programs. Language classes in tribal and community colleges can reach secondary and elementary schools as well.
I think it's always good to consider what you're using to teach. what different mediums or different tools, computers, CD-ROMs, but we should not forget the traditional aspect of what our language is, that it's still a spiritual language, and that language survives spoken. And the technology is never going to replace that experience of going out with an elder to the rice bed, to knocking rice.
We're not using the language that he gave us. We're losing a very, very important part of ourselves. How to regain that? And it's only through our children. We have skipped so many generations by loss of our mental well-being, by the loss of our spiritual well-being, by the loss of our emotional well-being and our physical well-being. We are filling up the jails. We are filling up the mental institutions. We are filling up the treatment centers. Our houses are empty. We are out on the street. We need to get back our identity. We have to find our own way in this society. We have to find a way to survive.
We have to have our leadership believe that language is the single most important thing. Sometimes the priority has been misplaced. A lot of people put health, economics, and then language. No, it's language first. That's where our health comes from. Without our language, there is no health. You know, there's death. And so that's why we have to truly make believers of everyone that's, you know, Anishinaabe.
I'm confident that the group of people who are working on it now, the elders who are there all the time, and those soon-to-be elders, and those adults and families, and the couples who are working hard, and the little kids who have this interest. How do you say this? Can you teach me how to speak in Ojibwe? I think we're going to be able to do it. We have to be able to do it. Really, there's no choice. We're going to do it.
In the time of the seventh fire, the prophet also said, a young and new people shall rise, and to retrace the steps to retrieve those things that were abandoned. Our language, our traditional spiritual teachings. I believe what we are doing here is a part of it. The new people are here. The seventh fire generation is here.